Welcome. I am with Evelyn Vieira today, and she is a cycle breaker coach specializing in narcissistic trauma recovery. And Evelyn, this has been a topic that I have wanted to start diving into. When I started Glitch, I knew that this was a topic that I wanted to just unpack. And I've learned that there's just so many layers when it comes to narcissism. So when you and I crossed paths a couple of weeks ago, I knew immediately that I've got to have Evelyn on my podcast because
Yeah.
I love your story. I love what you teach. So let's dive right into it.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me, Monica. I've been looking forward to this conversation. And right, there is a lot. There's a lot to unpack. We could talk about this, starting now for the next 2 weeks nonstop and still not cover everything. There's a lot there. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So I want to start by saying, how do you know that you are in a narcissistic relationship? Like what are some of the signs?
The signs are, I'll say, when we grow up in dysfunction, we oftentimes attract. So if we have a narcissistic parent, we oftentimes attract a narcissistic partner because that's what's familiar. So a lot of the times the red flags to us don't exist because we don't know what the red flags are because it's just normal.
It's all we know.
Yeah. So for those of us, I grew up in a narcissistic family system. So my first husband was narcissistic. And there's definitely a range with narcissism. But I would say some of the signs are feeling like you have to walk on eggshells. I had never realized, I didn't realize for the first several years of our marriage that it was toxic. I just knew that I always felt like I was walking on eggshells. I felt like it was always my fault. That is another sign of being in a narcissistic relationship where there's an imbalance in power, where one person, the narcissist or narcissistic person, really calls the shots. It's their narrative that leads everything. And you're not able to have your own opinion, your own thoughts, your own identity a lot of the time. And what that does over time is it just erodes who we are as people because we start to lose ourselves, in order to stay and in order to please that narcissistic person because the people pleasing and all of that just never really comes
Right.
because that's how they control us.
It's almost like
So
they set the pace of the atmosphere.
absolutely. Yeah. They set up the environment. And
Mhm.
then when we're in that environment, I wrote a blog not too long ago, and I was talking about if you lived in a house that had in the walls, you're
Mhm.
not able to see the mold, but you might have symptoms. You might have kind of asthmatic kind of reactions. You might have other symptoms that you are being exposed to something that's toxic.
Right.
Right? Even though you're not able to see it, it's kind of the same way in a narcissistic relationship. Even if the person that you're with or your parent isn't screaming at you and hitting you and berating you all the time, there can be significant emotional damage happening
Mhm.
just under the surface. And that oftentimes shows up as disregard and invalidation.
Mhm.
So if you come home from work or something and you're sharing something with this person and they somehow turn it around and make it all about them, or they just completely disregard what has happened to you, even if it's a good thing, bad thing, doesn't matter. That is just another form of saying, you don't matter, I
Mhm.
do, and this conversation is about me. And so it kind of grooms us over time and erodes our self-esteem because we're never really seen for who we are.
Or if you're like open and honest with your emotions and your feelings about something, it's normal for them to come back and almost like just not validate your feelings and explain to you
Absolutely.
why you shouldn't feel this way.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Narcissistic people are very emotionally immature. There are
Mhm.
a lot of experts out there who say that, the age range, emotional age range from everything that I've read is between the ages of 3 to 11. Most experts say, narcissists really fall between like 7 and 9 years old. So if you know a 7 to 9 year old kid, they really are in that phase, developmental phase of making it about themselves, and
Yeah.
that's appropriate. But when we're talking about an adult still stuck in that phase, it can be really helpful to realize that they are emotionally extremely immature.
Mhm.
And no matter what you say and do, they most likely are not going to be able to really see you or validate you because they're stuck, at the age emotionally of a 7 to 9 year old.
Wow. Can you share some of your experiences like growing up?
Yeah, so I've studied this for, like I said, a number of years, and it wasn't until just 2 years ago that I hit rock bottom. It was August of 2021, and everything was great in my life. I had no reason to be shutting down, but I was, drinking a lot. I couldn't understand why I felt so dead inside, and I couldn't understand why. I
Mhm.
felt like I had no will to live anymore. And the life was just kind of being sucked out of me. And once I started doing some therapy and reading, going to support groups, I realized I had a lot of unhealed trauma from my childhood. And once I started putting pieces together of all of the things in my childhood that have never been validated or acknowledged by my mom, I started realizing this is really familiar.
Mhm.
I know these patterns because I've been studying narcissism for so long, but I hadn't looked through that lens before to understand that I had a narcissistic mom. But one of the things that is extremely consistent when you have a narcissistic parent or you're growing up in a narcissistic family system is there is a term called parentification. Have you heard that term?
I'm not. Mm-mm.
Okay, so parentification is where the role between the parent and the child is flipped.
Okay.
And so if you have an emotionally immature parent, they're not capable of parenting their children in a healthy way. And
Mhm.
so they will rely on their children for emotional support. So that is what happened from the time, I was groomed from the time I was born to be my mom's emotional support system.
Mhm.
And what this does to us developmentally is it stunts our emotional growth
Mhm.
because rather than having the ability to focus on ourselves and to talk about our own needs and our feelings and what's going on for us as children, it's all about taking care of the parent.
Yeah.
And so we learn that our needs are not important. We
Mm.
learn to stuff our feelings, and we learn that to kind of disappear and to kind of live in the background. And
And
then
you
later on in
almost
life,
some of your
oh, go
child.
ahead.
I was like, it's almost like you miss out on your childhood.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You do. You miss out on your childhood. And when I started recognizing, those patterns and that I was groomed to be my mom's emotional support person
Mhm.
from a young age, I realized, oh my gosh, like I missed out on so much of my childhood because it wasn't about me. It was about taking care of her and making sure that she was okay
Right.
and taking care of her trauma, like hearing about her trauma from her childhood and all of those things. And so when that happens, and this is very consistent with narcissists, whether you're married to one, have an ex that is one, or have children with them, or you have a parent, this is how they treat their children, that their children are an extension of themselves. And
Mhm.
so they're not capable of seeing their own children, no matter how old they are, as their own, you know, separate entities, as an independent person outside of them. It's all about the narcissist.
Wow. Now you mentioned something about the curse of the double bind.
Yes.
Can you, what is that?
So I wrote a blog post about this a while back, and I'm writing a book about this topic. And so I'm going to have a whole chapter devoted to the curse of the double bind. The curse of the double bind is at the core of all narcissistic relationships. And what it is narcissists are excellent at putting us in a position where we are wrong no matter what we choose.
Like you
So
can't.
that is a double bind.
Okay. Oh gosh.
So if you think about a situation with a narcissistic person in your life, it might sound like, so I'll give you an example. In my first marriage, my husband would say, we would want to get takeout or something. And I would say, okay, what kind of food do you want? And he would say, whatever, get whatever you want. And I'll
Mhm.
be like, okay, how about Thai? No, I don't want Thai. Okay, how about Chinese? I don't want Chinese food. How about Mexican? And I would go down the whole list.
It
I'd be
turns
like,
into an
okay,
argument.
right. And then, but he would tell me, I don't care what we get
Right.
on one hand. And he would say, go ahead and make the decision. And when I would go to make the decision, he turned down everything that I wanted to get.
Yeah.
So I got to the point where I was just like, screw it, whatever, get whatever you want, because obviously everything that I'm saying is wrong.
Yeah.
And so that is a simplistic
Right.
example of the curse of the double bind. And what that does to survivors and victims is it puts us in a place of being really hyper vigilant
Yeah.
and being really terrified and scared of making decisions
Hmm.
because we don't want to be wrong, because we've been constantly in a position where no matter what we choose, it's the wrong answer. And so this is a way that
You almost
narcissists
point where you don't want to
manipulate us.
say
What
anything.
was that?
It almost gets to the point where you don't want to say anything.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because it's going to be a fight and it's just not worth the fight. But once I understood this dynamic,
Yeah.
it was a lot easier for me to see it in my relationships. I mean, I used to attract narcissists like crazy. I've had narcissistic bosses, I've had narcissistic friends, partners. I mean, like, I was just like, I just attracted them and I couldn't figure out what am I doing? What's wrong with me?
Uh,
Why am I attracting these toxic personalities? And it wasn't until I started working on my own trauma and realizing that all of my codependency traits were due to trauma. And then I started healing that trauma, that
right.
abandonment trauma. And then everything shifted because those relationships, I wasn't a people pleaser anymore. And
Mhm.
those relationships need you to be a people pleaser
Right.
so that you will fulfill what the narcissist wants. And so, learning these dynamics can be really empowering for people. And that's why I do the work that I do.
I've never heard of that curse of the double bind. I've experienced it.
Yeah.
I didn't know that it was a thing, and then over time, it's like you just get so, I guess, used to that. You just feel like
Hmm.
there's no getting out of it. That's just how it is.
Hmm.
You accept it. After a while, you just start accepting it.
Right.
That's
And
what happened with me.
because you're not given a choice.
Yeah.
You're forced to just, this is the way it is.
Right.
And
Wow.
you don't have a voice, and it's funny because, I have my own business and one of the marketing tools I've heard is keep things simple because a confused mind can't make decisions.
Mhm.
So if you think about a toxic relationship, narcissists are excellent at keeping us confused so that we can't make decisions, so that we can't get really clear on what they're doing, because they'll do something really kind sometimes and then right after that do something really cruel and mean.
Yeah.
And I mean, we could go into trauma bonding because that's like basically
Do
what
it.
that is.
Yeah.
um but it is like these dynamics are so degrading. They're so incredibly powerful at tearing us apart from the inside out.
Mhm.
But the problem is we can't, there's nothing that you can really put your finger on it. You just feel something is off.
Mhm.
And oftentimes what ends up happening as victims, we learn, and survivors, we learn that we are the problem
Mhm.
because the narcissist will never be accountable or responsible for their actions. And so we go through, and I went through a lifetime, 40 years of thinking I was the problem in my family, thinking that, it was just me. And it wasn't until I started realizing, oh my God, these are the same patterns I've been studying my whole life. I know what this is. Then I was able to pull myself out of it and heal and understand I was never the problem to begin with. I was reacting, I was having a normal response to a really effed up system.
Yeah. So you talk a lot about that kind of showing up in our parenting.
I do. Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about that? Because I've got kids at home and I try to
Yeah.
be like super sensitive to, obviously not bring any of that under this roof, but how, let's talk a little bit about that, like how it shows up in our parenting.
Yes. So I will tell you, and I'll send you all of this because I have some special gifts for your listeners.
Yes.
But I have this printout. It's called the narcissistic legacy chart.
Okay.
Basically, what this is my freebie, is I have on this side, if your narcissistic parent did these things in the yellow, and this is how you reacted, and this is how you might be treating your child. So those things are, if you grew up in a household, or if you were in a toxic relationship with an ex, and they were unpredictable,
Mhm.
like you never knew, you learned to walk on eggshells, you weren't quite sure what to do. You may have responded by stuffing your emotions, holding all of your opinions inside, like we've been talking about. And then with your children, you might respond by trying to control them. So the control aspect gets passed down through generations because we learn to control ourselves so much in
Yeah.
childhood, especially when we're raised by a narcissist.
Mhm.
And then we end up kind of perpetuating that cycle subconsciously with our own kids by trying to control them or feeling responsible for fixing things for them.
Mhm.
So this is how codependency gets passed on is, if your child, I mean, if you want to give an example, feel free. I'm trying to think of an example from my own life where it's really important. And what I've learned in my parent coaching training is it's crucially important to allow children to wrestle with being uncomfortable,
Mhm.
right? But when we're raised in a dysfunctional home, we are trained that we are responsible to fix things for them.
Mhm.
So then we go to try to fix things for our kids. And then that ends up making kids a lot of the time entitled, thinking, oh, I don't have to actually own up to my stuff because my parents are going to bail me out.
Mhm.
Or my mom is going to come and, bail me out of the situation or whatever, because we're so scared of letting go of that control.
Mhm.
So that's just one simple example of how these traits can get passed down. But what I've learned is that unless we heal our own abandonment trauma,
Mhm.
we will accidentally, and this is what was happening with me, accidentally start to pass those traits on to our kids. And then our kids may grow up and start attracting manipulative, narcissistic people because that's what feels familiar, even if we're not narcissistic. If we're parenting from a place of codependency, where we have really high expectations, where perfectionism is just a symptom of trauma, of having really high standards. And so if we have that kind of mindset, then we tend to pass that on to our kids. And what that tends to create is a feeling of not being good enough
Yeah.
and a lack of resiliency or acceptance
Mhm.
when we fail. And so I teach parents how to get out of that, how to completely transform their mindset and how they're talking to themselves so that they don't, accidentally pass that on to their kids.
Right. Wow, that's something I definitely want to read up on a little bit more. Because
Yeah,
I don't want to be doing it, but not being aware that I'm doing it.
right,
You know? Um,
right.
so all right, so speaking of co-parenting, what are like, do you have some tips? Because when you have an ex who is a narcissist, I mean, there's no, you got to deal with them.
Yep,
So is there tips on how to co-parent when you have a narcissistic ex?
absolutely. Absolutely. And I work with parents who are in that situation. I've been in that situation with my husband, with my now husband, and his ex-wife for 12 years now. And so we've done so many therapy sessions and read so many books on this topic to understand how to do this, because you have to walk that fine line where you're protecting your children and
Mhm.
teaching them what's right and wrong without bad mouthing the
Yeah.
other parent.
Mhm.
right? So the one thing that I tell parents all the time, and this is something that is, we had therapists tell us when we first started going down this path. We had one therapist tell us, be the flagpole. And we still use that to this day, be the flagpole.
Mhm.
She's like, the other parent is going to be the flag. The kids are going to be the flag. They're going to be flapping around in the wind. They're going to be changing things, or, especially kids. I mean, they're so impressionable a lot of the time, and they just want to, be loved.
Right.
And so, but if you can be the flagpole, if you can make your words and actions match, that
Mhm.
is the most powerful thing you can do as a parent, as the stable parent.
Mhm.
If you just do that and focus on that while you're co-parenting, that will make a huge difference,
Mhm.
because it will help to ground you, knowing that you have power
Mhm.
in the ability to have your words and actions match,
Right.
because narcissists can't.
Yeah.
Their words and actions contradict each other all the time.
Mhm.
And children pick up on that.
Yeah.
And that is what we've learned is my stepdaughters, we have now one in college and one is a sophomore in high school. And they absolutely know how stable we are, because our words and actions have always matched, and we've never badmouthed the other parent. And
Mhm.
so the more consistency you can do for that, the better. And then the other thing I would say is there are a lot of tools around how to interact with your ex that I teach people, but keeping things about the kids and
Mhm.
limiting interaction. So
Mhm.
sticking to, there's a term called parallel parenting, which is basically dividing the duties more or less. So you have your own teacher parent conferences. You don't have the other parent come to those. You have your own well check appointments with your kids at the pediatrician's office. All of those things are independent. And
Right.
so you begin to really separate out. It's not co-parenting, it's parallel parenting. You're parenting without having as much input from the other parent. That really is the best advice that we've found and that we've been able to do, that makes a huge difference. And then as far as like what to say to the other parent when they cross boundaries, the most important thing I tell parents is document everything. And if
Mhm.
you can get it time stamped by using, there are different co-parenting apps and stuff, emailing yourself, emailing your lawyer, emailing a pediatrician,
Mhm.
documenting as much as you can, because you never know when you might be, in front of a judge going to court.
Right.
But having a long-term documented pattern of behavior
Mhm.
will absolutely work in your favor, no matter what happens.
You're talking about parallel parenting.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can imagine if I did a parent teacher conference without the other parent, that other parent might get very upset about that.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you deal with that?
I would say if you have the ability to create a parenting plan while you're going through a divorce,
Mhm.
like make it part of the divorce decree that this is how we are going to parent together. And then you don't have to call it parallel parenting. You can call it whatever you want, but
Mhm.
that both parents have independent rights basically to do XYZ. So if you're able to do that, I would say go that route. I also encourage parents, if they need to, get a third party involved. So, schools and stuff, of course, they don't want to get involved in people's drama, of course.
Mhm.
But you have every right as a parent to set up a parent teacher conference with your teacher, or your kid's teacher, whenever you want to.
Mhm.
So it doesn't need to be, you could, in a situation where you have a really high conflict person, you could, depending on the situation, go to those meetings with the intention that I'm just going to sit here and listen and show up. And
Mhm.
then I'm going to ask the real questions I want to ask and really dive into how my child is doing in the classroom next Tuesday when I'm meeting with the teacher privately.
Okay.
So there are different strategies you can engage in depending on your situation, especially if it's, if your ex is very volatile and it's a dangerous situation.
Mhm.
Absolutely get as many third parties involved to keep yourself safe and your
Right.
child safe
Mhm.
um, as possible. And I often, tell people if there's neglect going on in the home at the other house,
Mhm.
I've had parents tell me that their ex won't feed their 4-year-old because they think their 4-year-old needs to be on a diet.
Mhm.
Ridiculous things like that.
Yeah.
And go and take them to a well check appointment.
Mhm.
Set those things up. Talk to the child psychologist at the child's school. Get somebody else involved who can start seeing what's going on
Yeah.
so that it's not just you. Yeah,
God, so many layers.
there are so many layers.
So many layers. Okay, you had mentioned to me an app.
Yes.
There's an app. There's an app for this.
There's an app for this. Yes.
Yeah. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So I will say I haven't used this app personally, but I have had a lot of clients use it and I've talked to other people and a lot of lawyers recommend people using this app. And it is called My Family Wizard.
Okay.
And it is basically kind of a one-stop shop to document everything between while you're co-parenting, especially if you have a hostile, conflict-driven
Mhm.
ex who will manipulate you and say, "Oh, I never got your email," or and just use stuff against you.
Right.
So it's a really great way to be able to document everything because you cannot delete anything within the app.
Or I,
So
or if they say, I told you this, you can go back.
yes,
No, you never told me that.
exactly. So this kind of, takes away the ability for them to gaslight you.
Mhm.
And a lot of the time, lawyers, that I've worked with and um, other people that I've talked to, therapists, often just say this is the one place to communicate with your ex. Do not text them, do not meet with them in person, do not call them, that it is a safe, basically, form of communication
Okay.
because they're limited on what they can and can't do. And so, but it's a one-stop shop for, like, let's say you take your child to a dentist appointment, there's a copay. You can put that in the financial piece of this app so that there's, consistency across the board of how much each parent is paying. And then you guys can figure out how to settle up. So there's a financial piece. There's just like daily things you can put in there. You can put the schedule, like the kids' schedule. So like soccer on Tuesday goes in the app. There's just a lot of different things that, it gets really complicated when you are co-parenting in two households, let
Right.
alone co-parenting with someone who is hostile and toxic.
Right.
It adds a whole other dynamic. So I really recommend. So it's called My Family Wizard.
My family wizard. I'm looking into that too. And it's something that I would have on my phone, he would have on his phone.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's an app that both of you would download.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. We have,
Absolutely.
there's so much to unpack. Like I said, there's so many layers.
There is. And it's when, if there's anyone listening to this who is just in the beginning stages of understanding what they've been through, I
Mhm.
just say do as much research as you can and understanding the impact of narcissistic abuse
Mhm.
because it is no small beast to heal from and it can take years and that's normal and that's okay. And so this is not something that just can be swept under the rug in
Right.
order for you to really truly heal. So thank you so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed talking with you. And yeah,
Mhm.
I hope that we've brought some light into this very dark topic.
Absolutely. And mention your website and how if someone wants to get in contact with you, how they can connect.
Yeah, absolutely. So the name of my website is cyclebreakerparenting.com. And that is my handle on social media. I'm starting a YouTube channel as well. So it's just Cycle Breaker Parenting. You can find me on all platforms. And I actually have an on-demand class that I'm offering to anyone who's listening on a podcast. And so I'll send that to you so you can put that kind of in the notes, in the podcast notes. But it's basically it's a 45-minute 3-part series with PDF printouts and stuff to really understand how narcissistic abuse impacts us, especially when we have a narcissistic parent, and then how that stuff gets passed down to our kids. And then the third video is the best one, which is all about breaking the cycle. And
Great.
that is what I specialize in. So I have a 5-part formula of what I teach parents to break the cycle for themselves and their kids.
Wonderful. I can't wait to dive into it.
Oh yeah, it's a powerful process. And honestly, this is the path that I took when I was coming out of all of this,
Yeah.
and so I want to be able to give those tools to other people to help them heal and break the cycle as well. So
Well, thank you so much, and I appreciate you.
yeah, thank you so much, Monica. This
Thanks
has
for the
just been a
basketball has.
pleasure. Yes, me too. I'm so glad. And hopefully this won't be the last time. Yeah. Thank you so much.